So Star Wars is in a bit of an odd place right now, and I don't think it's unfair to say that Disney has been struggling to create content that the fans are really, well, a fan of. With the sheer volume of content that they keep putting out, they really are falling short of capturing what makes Star Wars Star Wars. There's been a lot of news about various projects with delays like Andor Season 2, to outright cancellations of like the Rey Solo film. Okay, so when I was editing this video, it doesn't look like the Rey Solo film is being outright canceled or even delayed. I think these are mostly just rumors, so scratch that. Now, I know that a lot of this is kind of outside of Disney's control. You know, Andor Season 2 was mostly delayed due to the writer's strike, and I'm not sure what or how that might have affected, you know, the Rey Solo film or any of their other various projects. So it's not totally on them, but regardless, they don't really seem to have a cohesive vision or really direction that they want to take the story. Now, I'm not going to spend this entire video shitting on Star Wars or, you know, the sequels, Kathleen Kennedy, Charmin Obaid-Chinoy. It's not like anybody actually does that. But I'd rather focus on something that I think has a lot of potential, and one of the shows that I am most looking forward to in 2024. Star Wars: The Acolyte has the most potential of anything set to come out in the near future, in my opinion. Now, it has been hard to find any concrete information about the series, but from what I can gather, it's going to be centered around the Sith about 100 years before the events of Episode 1. The story will follow two Force-sensitive twins, one being a dark side assassin and the other being on the light side. I'm not sure if she's supposed to be a Jedi or what. Again, it's kind of been hard to find anything definitive right now. The Acolyte is also supposed to be more of a thriller or a mystery in its design. So far, so good. I'm kind of a big fan of this concept, the era that it's set in. Everything looks solid right now. But with that being said, Star Wars has betrayed my trust before, and The Acolyte is probably not going to be an exception to that. I think the show is largely going to come down to how well it's written, directed, acted, etc. And I know that kind of sounds like a non-statement, like, no shit, every show comes down to how well it's written, directed, whatever. But to be honest, this sort of pseudo-hype is kind of what Disney deserves. It's hard to get your hopes up for stuff like this because Disney hasn't been shooting 100% right now. So proceeding with caution, I think, is the best deal you're going to get. Again, not going to spend the whole video shitting on Disney. The building blocks of a pretty good show are here, though. I really think they can turn this into what the prequels should have been. A sort of look at the high and mighty Jedi, blinded by their hubris and ultimately infiltrated and defeated by a clever and calculated villain. And with the benefit of hindsight, I think they can avoid some of the shortcomings like the terrible, dialogue, writing, and obsessive need to use, frankly, unnecessary CGI. I'm also a huge fan of them centering the show around this archetypal theme of, the warring brothers, or in this case, sisters, sort of Cain and Abel style direction that they could take the story. This is bolstered by the fact that George Lucas was heavily influenced by Carl Jung and the central hero's journey when creating the original trilogy. So this family-centered archetypal struggle is something that I think George Lucas probably could have come up with too. Additionally, kind of by going back in time before the prequels, they kind of have a safety net set up for themselves. Essentially, all of the show's events have to filter into the prequels, and those events filter into the original trilogy, which everybody holds in pretty high regard. I think that's pretty safe to say. So there's really not too much they can do to damage all of our beloved characters, because those characters will still have to do the things that made them beloved in the first place. So it's not 100%, but it's kind of an interesting thought. Ultimately, how bad could they mess it up? Luke Skywalker still has to be Luke Skywalker. Obi-Wan's still going to be Obi-Wan. There's not much they can do. The sequels notably did not have this constraint. And you kind of see, one of the biggest beefs in the sequels was the character assassination of Han Solo, Leia, Luke, pretty much everybody. nobody really seemed to act as if they had gone through the arc of the original trilogy. Again, it's also far enough back that we'll likely get to see a new cast of characters, but still some familiar faces sprinkled in. Basically, if Darth Plagueis somehow shows up and fucking kills some people, I am so down for that. All of this to say, if they stick with the archetypal themes that are so central to Star Wars design and actually write the characters well and avoid some of the pitfalls of the earlier movies, I think the Acolyte has an insane amount of potential. However, the show can and very well might be terrible. I'm not sure how I feel about the creator, Leslie Headland, and to be honest, her being at the helm is the biggest gray area / area for concern for me. The good news is she does genuinely seem to be a fan of Star Wars, and especially the Legends content that this show is and should pull heavily from.
As somebody that grew up both with, obviously George's films and then the release of the special editions, like for a long period of time, I'm not going to age myself, but the extended universe and a lot of that publishing was really the only Star Wars that I had. And so what I love about the High Republic is that it's kind of in the grand tradition of what Star Wars was for the fans for a really long time. I hope that I do the fans proud because it is such a beautiful, rich, gorgeous world that people should be investing into as fans. As a fan myself that grew up with a lot of publishing as opposed to media, because we just didn't have any media the way that we do now. I hope that if you watch The Acolyte, it does inspire you to get further into the High Republic, and the publishing phase 1 was incredible. I think it was just astonishing. I think that
the way that she describes the world as rich and gorgeous makes me pretty hopeful that she's got the aesthetic of this era down. I'll link the Star Wars Celebration interview with her below. You can make up your own minds, but I definitely got this vibe from her. However, some of her comments made in adjacent interviews, not necessarily specifically about the Acolyte, but more or less her vision and creative direction as a director, are what most people are getting hung up on.
Direction and not the other. Like, this is like what we understand to be Star Wars. Like, the idea that like that only came from George Lucas, that only George Lucas holds the key for what we understand to be Star Wars is just untrue. And I think the prequels are an excellent example of that. I mean, but you look at McQuarrie's work and you realize like what an indelible mark this man has made on culture via this one role that he played in this film. And the idea that like when you're hiring a director, that everyone is sitting in there waiting for George Lucas and not for the person who's going to know to hire Ralph McQuarrie, that's the problem. That's the misogyny and the problem with the auteur myth as it stands today. Because
I keep seeing this podcast clip being thrown around and people using it to say Star Wars is dead and the Acolyte is killing it, which is pretty dishonest because Star Wars has sucked for like a fucking decade now. Even with that considered, I think the backlash against her isn't 100% warranted. While I do personally disagree with a lot of her comments, George Lucas is Star Wars and his approval means a ton when it comes to the success of future projects. I don't think she was necessarily disrespecting George and the work that he's put in. She comes off as saying that George isn't the only person capable of making a good Star Wars story, which is correct. You can look at the Legends content or the Clone Wars TV series, but what she's missing is that these stories were either created with the direct help of George, like in the case of the Clone Wars TV series, or with an immense amount of respect given to the original trilogy, like in Legends. Headland's knowledge and fandom of the franchise, or lack thereof if you want to make that argument, isn't necessarily what will be the show's undoing. I think what has me more concerned, and what has the majority of fans more concerned, is that Headland as a director seems to be geared more towards creating stories around gender politics and gender issues. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily about making stories like that. That's a central part of what it is to be human. Obviously, we have different genders, there's going to be conflict in between those. But this has never really felt at home in Star Wars to me. especially if it's going to be the main point of a series. And to be honest, if you combine this with the Star Wars Celebration interview of the Acolyte's presumed lead, Jodie Turner-Smith, this doesn't really bode well.
So my character, you know, she's a powerful leader. She's a powerful leader. Yes. In a very woman-centered world, which I was very excited to kind of be in that, because I feel like Star Wars is very like patriarchal, so it was kind of cool to have like this sort of woman-centered figure.
This is just straight up not true about Star Wars, and it never has been. I'll be quick as to not beat a dead horse, but Leia, Padme, Ahsoka, Aayla Secura, Zam, Bo-Katan, Asajj Ventress, Shaak Ti, Mother Talzin, Mon Mothma. Do I really need to go on? All of these women play pivotal roles in the stories that they're in, the films or TV shows, and they play a wide range of characters. Okay, to be fair, from this interview, again, I'll link this one below, I don't think Turner-Smith is a fan of Star Wars, which, again, to be fair, I really don't think she has to be. Her job as an actress is to act out the director's vision for this character, and I don't think that you have to be, frankly, a nerd about Star Wars in order to do that well. So she might just be repeating talking points she's hearing, or just kind of going for a clip, or honestly just being nervous about being interviewed about Star Wars. It doesn't really matter, because her opinions about Star Wars really don't matter. They're just not relevant to how well she's going to act out Headland's creative vision. Alright, I've kind of gone all over the place with this one. I hope it's not too jumbled what I'm trying to say, but basically, The Acolyte, I think, has a ton of upside potential. Being set in the High Republic, with a solid archetypal framework, and a director who legitimately is a fan of Star Wars, sounds like a recipe for success. As long as they can avoid kind of redundant and stupid gender issues, and maybe not dwell on them as the central focus of the show, and actually write the characters well and make them compelling, I don't think there's any reason to think that The Acolyte will suck. However, if the show does devolve into the men bad, woman good territory too much, then this is probably just going to be another case of the Disney special.
Put a chick in it, make her gay!
I love Star Wars, and I genuinely want the franchise to succeed, and that obviously extends to The Acolyte. I really want this show to be good, and I think it really can be. So, against maybe my better judgment, I am putting my hope in Leslie Headland and looking forward to the release of The Acolyte whenever it comes out.